It's right after Thanksgiving.
That's
So
the
it's,
last one?
yeah.
So the 25th?
No, well, let me see.
Oh, so we have only 2 and 1 practical out?
One practical left.
One practical.
No. Time.
So the 3rd? Second?
Yeah.
The next Thursday.
The 2nd? Oh, December 2nd.
Thanksgiving, Cindy, Thanksgiving is on the 25th.
Okay.
So your last practical, the fourth one will be on the 2nd of December. And then that last week is just exams.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am?
No, we got it.
Put a day drinking. After.
You were making up new rules like usual.
It's him. He's telling me to ask you. I'm just a messenger.
Just not me.
So today, we'll finish up immunology, talking about immunizations and acquired immunity, adaptive immunity. And then we will start epidemiology. I may not finish epidemiology today, but we'll finish it on Thursday, and we will start Unit 5 on Thursday. So Unit 5's got 6 lectures in it, and I'll think about it this week and how that might progress. I might have to record 2 lectures and let you have them, and then you'll have to do that, right? Because we're running out of time. Okay? Anybody have questions? You comfortable just later? All right. So let's talk about adaptive immunity, acquired immunity. So if we think about this, in order for our bodies to be able to adapt or acquire this immunity, there are 3 characteristics our body has to be able to recognize and do, right? Number 1, our bodies have to be able to recognize non-self. Now, if there are no T4 helpers, that just doesn't work, right? So those individuals who are immunocompromised are never going to have acquired immunity. There has to be antigenic specificity, so what that means is that there has to be epitopes on the surface of the structures that are non-self.
Wait,
Yep.
is there any way you can take off your thing? Because I can't, it's really.
If people don't want it, I'll do it. I mean, it's against the rules, but,
I don't mind.
okay.
Close the door.
Close the door?
Just in case, you know.
So, has to have antigenic specificity, is that better?
A lot
Yes.
better.
So antigenic specificity simply means there has to be epitope protein by nature, right? So that the immune system can make immunoglobulins against those particular proteins. And the last thing is that the body has to develop immunity. So this is long-term protection. When the immune response recognizes non-self and makes immunoglobulins, IgG, against that particular non-self entity. Okay?
You said epitope proteins?
Epitopes are like, if you think about this as being non-self, all the little curvatures would be epitopes. They're proteins
Okay,
on the surfaces of the cell.
okay. And those are the ones that make the immunoglobulins?
No, the other way around. Those are the things that the body makes immunoglobulins against.
Okay.
Okay, good. So if we think about this, this is my favorite chart ever because it tells an entire story. So we can acquire immunity either naturally or artificially, right? And so if we just look at natural for a minute, we can have natural acquired immunity that's active because we come down with the infectious agent. The body goes through the entire infectious process. It goes through the immunological response, and it develops immunoglobulins against the non-self entity, the infectious agent that's in the body. Okay? Are you with me? This is long-term, or life. Okay? We can also acquire natural immunity passively by, for instance, immunoglobulins, IgG, going through the placenta and protecting the baby, or through breastfeeding, right? Now, breastfeeding, there's a lot of research out there about breastfeeding and how nutritious that mother's milk is, and the bond that's actually formed between the mother and the infant. But from a purely immunological and microbiological perspective, I'm in it for the immunoglobulins. Are you with me? So, I mean, and you can buy colostrum, And you can take colostrum, and it has a little bit of IgG in it. So people take it to boost their immune response, right? I have some at home, I can bring it in if you wanna see it. It's colostrum, right? Of course, from. Yep,
But let's say if you have like an autoimmune disease, like, you shouldn't do that, right? Or
I can't answer that question just because I don't know what the response should be. I don't know. I've not heard anything. Anybody else ever heard anything about that?
Are you talking about like if you have AIDS or something, you shouldn't breastfeed?
no, I mean like, okay, so if you have like an autoimmune disease, like
Like lupus.
lupus,
Okay.
yeah,
Oh,
wouldn't taking more like things that like make your immune system stronger kind of trigger autoimmune responses?
That's a really great question. I do not have an answer for you, unfortunately. Okay? Let's look at artificial. So we can acquire immunity artificially by taking an immunization. The body does not recognize the difference between an infectious agent and pieces of the infectious agent. It treats it the same way. This is why I'm such a proponent for immunizations, because if we just give a little piece of the infectious agent, the body will respond by making immunoglobulins against that particular piece of infectious agent. That's how a lot of the vaccines work, and we're gonna talk about vaccines in just a little bit. Okay?
So what are the big points from that, like, little speech should we take?
One more time.
What are the big points from that little speech should we take?
that vaccines work. They put a little bit of the infectious agent inside of you, or the whole infectious agent inside of you, and your body doesn't know the difference. It thinks it's a viable organism, and your body makes immunoglobulins, IgG, against that non-self entity. Okay? Other questions? That's a nice clarification. The other way we can develop artificial, this is long-term, right? Long-term, short-term, long-term, I think you see the pattern, it's gonna be short-term, right? So acquired immunity passively is by acquiring immune cells or immunoproteins from somebody else. So the biggest example right now is convalescent plasma, right? So people who have had COVID-19 can go to the blood bank or wherever, and they can donate their plasma, and it'll be labeled as convalescent plasma once it gets tested, and then it could be given to somebody who's having a really bad time with COVID. It's just not 100%, right? Some people respond very well to convalescent plasma, other people do not. Remember, everybody's immunological and physiological processes of the body are different, right? So what might work for me is not necessarily gonna work for Cheska or Carolina or Keon, right? We're all gonna be a little bit different, okay? So this one is typically called a gamma globulin. I have received 2 of those in my life. One of them, because I was gonna go to India for a business trip, and then they canceled my trip at the very last moment, but I took a gamma globulin. And then the other one is because I got exposed to HIV, okay? Now, usually with gamma globulin, you wanna take them for the region you're going to, because it doesn't really serve any purpose for me to take a gamma globulin that's from regional United States when I'm going to India. There's a lot of different infectious agents down in India that are gonna be different than are here. Gamma globulin is pulled from thousands of individuals and concentrated and then given to you, right? So you get all these immunocomplexes, all these immunoproteins from a bunch of different people. Okay?
Does that affect you in any way?
It hurt. So I never really complain about being given an injection or anything like that. That thing hurt. They gave me in the Bahamas. Sir?
Is there like, I guess, like a connection with gamma globulins and passive natural immunity?
Yeah, it is exactly that. So it's artificial acquired passive immunity, gamma globulin. I'll show you that. These next slides are just what I talked about. This is the infectious process. This is mama giving IgG to baby, right? This is immunizations, vaccines, right? So this would be that third one, right? This is artificially acquired active immunity because you get a vaccination. This is one of my heroes. His name is Jonas Salk. Jonas Salk developed 3 of the big vaccines, right? So he developed polio. He was one of the first ones to develop a pneumonia vaccine. And when the last thing he was working for acquired processes, HIV kind of, right? When he passed away. This guy was a badass. And so I like all the work he did in his entire time as a researcher. Right? And then here's gamma globulin, Geo. So gamma globulin is like this. Now I got it intramuscularly. You can do it intravenously also, and it doesn't hurt as much. But I didn't know the difference at the time, and I just said, well, the second time I knew, but I just said, just give it to me in the Bahamas because I need to go. And then the second time, it was like I didn't really have time to sit there and have an IV, right? So I was in a hurry, and so I got them
So you paid for that.
subcutaneously.
So
Yeah,
you pay for that.
it did hurt a little bit, you know. So we have gamma globulin that can be regional, but we also have gamma globulin that's specific to like venoms and poisons and things like that. So if we think about that for a minute, we have them against a lot of snakes and spiders and things like that. In the United States, we have gamma globulin. We have, if you will, IgG or anti-venom against like rattlesnakes, right? So if you get a rattlesnake bite and you get anti-venom against it, it works, but it's expensive, and so you can expect to be in the hole for about $35,000.
Wow.
You have to extract the venom from the actual snake, and it's hard to do that.
So no, they don't do it that way. The way they do it synthetically now, but the way that used to be done is they would take a little bit of the venom and put them into a different animal, like a horse or a goat, and then we would take the serum from them and use them because IgG is IgG. So they do it. They do this also synthetically because of the way we can manipulate the immune cells nowadays. And so we can make this in large quantities now, right? And because of clonal selection, we can do all kinds of different things with it. Okay. So the reason I know about the 35,000 is one of my friends got snake bit and got the treatment, and his where he got bit was in his leg, and it really swelled up pretty largely. But the anti-venom really suppressed the problem, right? But it was a $35,000.
Why expensive?
I'm not sure, other than they can, you know.
That's horrible.
So I don't know, I guess there's just not that much of it out there. I was surprised also. And here's the kicker, he had insurance, but the insurance wouldn't cover it. His insurance, I don't know if all insurance will do this, but his insurance wouldn't cover it because his insurance said that he was doing something dangerous.
What was that?
So he was walking in his field.
Walking in the field.
Uh-huh. So, you know, I have rattlesnakes on my property, and so I walk in the backyard and they're there. So I walk in the backyard is a dangerous thing. I don't kill the rattlesnakes. I think I told you I move them,
Really?
but my neighbor wants to kill them. So I don't put them
Come over
in.
your property.
Any questions? So then we're going to talk about vaccinations, right? And I'm going to tell you everything you ever want to know about vaccinations, but maybe weren't afraid to ask. But one of the things I want you to know about are adjuvants. Miss Carolina, do you know what an adjuvant is? That's okay. You can
Well, it's
say.
in vaccines.
Oh, what's that?
It's in vaccines.
It's in vaccine, sorry. An adjuvant is usually a salt, but it can be other things. So have you ever had a vaccine that didn't sting when it went in? Or a vaccine that really stung when you went in? So the adjuvant is what makes it sting. Sometimes it's glycerol, sometimes it's a salt. But when you put it in, it stings, and what it does is it irritates the body, therefore the immune response is triggered a lot quicker. So it's put into vaccines to trigger the immune response, so it's very quick. Okay?
What is it?
An adjuvant.
Oh, adjuvant.
So, people always ask me, you know, well, why is the COVID vaccine not experimental? Well, because just about every drug is experimental, right? Because even if you take a drug, it's going to react differently inside you. But when we release things, right, it's been through at least three different phases of clinical trial, right? So if we think about this, right, so you have phase 1, and you have phase 2, and then you have phase 3, which we have thousands of people in phase 3. And so you might have seen that, at least Pfizer BioNTech is actually saying we should get a booster. Not because you don't have immunoglobulins, but because they've seen it. So they've taken those thousands of people that they had in their phase 3 clinical trial, and they've followed them for the last year. And what they found out is after 9 months, the immunoglobulins start to come down. So their hypothesis is if you give them a little bit of another vaccine, the IgG is gonna pop up again, and you're gonna be much more protected than you would have been had you not got that booster.
Okay.
Okay, good. So I'm getting my booster hopefully on Friday. And we think we can get it, we're not sure. My whole family down in Corpus has already got it. Nobody in Corpus wants it, so they're letting anybody. And I think they're figuring out that that's kind of like happening in Austin too. So we're gonna go and see if we can get ours on Friday. But,
Then no one wants to take them, the boosters?
yeah, people are tired of the whole COVID thing and they just wanna get rid of the whole thing.
So can people get sick off the boosters?
Of a what?
The boosters, like, can people get sick off them?
Define sick.
Well, I know that, like, my residents at my job, they got really lethargic after it and like were.
That's a
but-
side effect. We're gonna talk about that in a minute. Okay? That's not sick.
Okay.
That's the immune response doing what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The purple things before this time, that's for adults, right?
Well, they've done it in kids also.
Yeah, that's my question. How they do with kids? Same.
Well, so, okay, it gets a lot more tricky because number one, the parents have to decide that their kids can go into a study, okay? And sometimes they get paid. I don't know how much or what, but I know one time, like, there used to be a company here, and it's changed its name now, but there used to be a company here that used to do clinical trials here, and you could go and try something, and you would pay, I don't know, $2,500 for the study, right? It's more expensive now. I think people get up to $8,000 now. So in college, one of my friends, that's all he did. He would go do these clinical trials. And so on some weekends, he couldn't study with us because he was sequestered in this area and they were doing a lot of testing on him, right? But yeah, that's how we do it. Okay. Some people volunteer, like I volunteered for one. I just simply said, yeah, I'll do it. And they said, do you want to be paid for it? I'm like, no, I don't need to be paid, just, but they give you the drug, right, or whatever, right? And so,
They give you the placebo or the drug. Right?
Huh?
They give you the placebo.
and they
Yeah.
fed me really well, you know, I got to pick like a steak or whatever, right? I was okay with it. I was young when I did it, right?
Right. But they'll give you get a placebo or the drug and you just.
Right, you don't
one.
know, it's a, what we call a double
Double
blind.
And they'll pay you either way?
Well, you're.
You
being-
can get paid, or I think nowadays you have to be paid.
They were gonna pay us for mine, 12-year-old.
Yeah,
But we were able to get him fully vaccinated before, but the whole trial, and we chose to do that.
so these are the different platforms of the COVID vaccine, and I'm gonna talk about these a little bit. Some of them I like a lot, some of them I don't really like. But this is the most common right now. It's an RNA vaccine, so this is a Pfizer-BioNTech one, and it's also the Moderna one.
What's the Johnson & Johnson?
It's a viral vector. It's this one. This one. So let's talk about these, right? So first of all, when you get the vaccine, you get a little bit of the transcript. The transcript interacts with your own ribosomes, and your ribosomes make the spike proteins, and then your body says this doesn't belong here, and they make immunoglobulins against those spike proteins effective, and you can never get sick from it. Right now, the definition of sick in a minute, Jaylen, we'll talk about what that means, okay?
Okay.
You cannot get COVID from it, right? So that's this messenger RNA. The live attenuated one, what that means is that you get the virus or the bacterium, that we've taken away the pathogenic properties from it. And so in that case, the virus gets in or the bacterium gets in the body and it acts like it normally would. And so the hypothesis there is because it's acting the way it normally does, the immune system reacts very quickly to it and you develop immunity quicker, right? Unfortunately, it can revert to virulence. What does that mean when we say that? It can revert to
It can
virulence.
go back to being pathogenic?
It can go back to being pathogenic. And it's not because the virus mutates, it's because something has happened in the processing that they didn't remove all the pathogenic properties. And this is the one that a lot of the anti-vaxxers just hone in on, because right now, there is, one of the polio vaccines that the World Health Organization said, do not use this one. But some of the countries in the Middle East and in Africa had already bought a lot of this vaccine, and they couldn't afford to just eat the cost. So they used it anyway, and people got polio, right? And so they were playing a game with their population, right? You can read about it. But that's not because the virus in the vaccine mutated, it's because it wasn't made properly, right? There's a book called The Cutter Incident. If you ever wanna have a nice read over the holidays, you can get The Cutter Incident. It'll talk about the problems that we had with the attenuated polio vaccine in the United States. Okay? Good? Questions? The next one is inactivated, and so this one, the virus or the microorganism is completely denatured. It's there in its whole entity, but it's not alive. It's dead, or it is inactivated. So it gets put in your body, and then the body basically says, you don't belong here, and they make immunoglobulins against it, right? But you can never get sick from it because the infectious agent has been completely inactivated or destroyed. Okay? The next one is subunit, and so here, these are pieces of the microorganism of the virus that are made in the lab, made by GMOs, right? And then they use this and they put it into a vaccine, and you get pieces of the organism, but these were made usually in a yeast cell or something else. Okay?
Made in a different cell.
And then the last one is a viral vector. So in a viral vector, what the companies do is they take a non-pathogenic virus, the cold, right, adenovirus, and then they put some of the properties of COVID on it or whatever, and then they give this to you, and then essentially what happens is this can go in, and it's harmless to us, right? But it delivers the epitopes that the body needs to actually develop the antibodies against. Okay, and that's what J&J is. J&J is so. The one that I don't like at all is I don't like the live attenuated one, and I try to stay away from them. But if that was the only choice, then I would get it. But I just try to stay. And those are the ones typically that are nasal. You almost never see them anymore because they don't really work all that great, right? There was one for Staphylococcus aureus, it bombed, and so it got taken off the market. There was some for influenza, and it didn't do so well. I think it's still out there. I think they re-engineered it, but I would just, kids, they're typically not gonna want to take a shot. But if you can just simply coax them into it, it's better. But instead of taking the nasal one, I don't recommend the nasal one for anything. Okay. Yep.
So why Johnson vaccine is not favored?
It's not my favorite.
No, not like to everybody.
Is it a percentage?
So it has, I don't know, what, 91% efficacy? That's great.
I think
If I get 70% efficacy on a vaccine, I'm happy.
Yeah.
These two, right, the Moderna and the BioNTech one, they were like at 94. They're
Mhm,
really
those are
good, right? And I think one of them had 96. Those are excellent numbers.
The Johnson & Johnson was at like 60 or something.
No, it wasn't that low.
70.
So
Good check.
so I'm a J&J boy, right? I worked for them for many years, but I'm just not impressed with the idea that they went this way. I think they went this way because they thought that they could make the vaccine a lot quicker. Because the other two companies, Moderna has been working on this, on the messenger RNA technology for a long time. They're going to take over the entire vaccine market. Because they not only have for COVID, they have for almost every infectious agent in the pipeline. Right? I wish I would have bought stock in them when they were $32, right? Because man, they were up to I don't know how much, but they made a lot. So I like the RNA ones a lot, and you can never get sick from them. People who are anti-vaxxers say that it's gene therapy. That's not true. Gene therapy simply means that you put genes into the chromosome, right, you're not doing that here, right?
You need to remove genes from somewhere, right, and then reinsert.
Yeah. So, you know, that happens naturally because if you've been infected by chickenpox or by measles or even, you know, COVID, the real infection, your genes have been altered a little bit, right? By the time we're our age that we're in this room, a lot of our cells are not exactly us. Are you with me? And that's why we like the meiosis process, because those are generated and they're different all the time, right? But your somatic cells for a lot. That's why you can get chickenpox as a young kid, and then later on develop shingles because that chromosome's been altered by the virus. Yes.
It did say 66.3% effective in
Right.
clinical trials. Bingo.
Yeah, but it's higher than that. I don't know. Where's that data coming from?
The
Google.
CDC.gov.
Okay. I think it's higher than that. When was that published? Okay, we
It is a
believe you.
joke.
Okay, we're gonna see this out. Okay? Questions? That's a really cool thing about teaching and then having computers in front of you, you can fact check real quick. So, if you think about vaccines, right? Vaccines should have low level of adverse reactions and side effects, and shouldn't have any toxicity, right? They should protect against the natural and the wild forms of the pathogen. They should stimulate both the antibody production B cells and the T cells to some-mediate immune response. They should have long-term and lasting effect, produce memory. Should not require very many boosters. And they should be inexpensive and have a relatively long shelf life. They are a biological agent, so they will degrade over a period of time. Okay? And so that's why, you know, the stability for the COVID vaccines are so limited right now. And it's not because the companies haven't been testing for it. It's what has been reviewed by the FDA. So when they open up a vial, I think that vial can stay open for 8 hours at the most. And then that's all the stability it has, it can still out. Right? So my brother called me from Corpus. He said, yeah, we were just walking in the shopping center, and a lady came out and said, does anybody want a free vaccine? And they all looked at her and said, well, we don't fit in the category. She said, but we're gonna have to throw this out, and so if you guys want it, it's free, come on in.
Yeah.
They all went in and got it, right? So it's pretty interesting to think about.
They were doing that at the Walmart here on Midway too.
So, lots of different vaccines out there, right? People are worried about them for lots of different reasons. Most of them are mostly political because people listen to people like Tucker
Carlson.
Yeah, him, right? But it's just really crazy. So let's talk about how the routes of administration. Right? So you can see some of them can be oral, some of them can be IV, some of them can be subcutaneous, or some can be right in the skin. Right. Now there's a difference. So, Kaylin, there's a difference between having a side effect and having an adverse reaction. A side effect, when you take a vaccine, it's a little bit of fever, a little bit of lethargy, maybe you get the sniffles, might be soreness in the arm, might have a little fever, but that's the immune system saying, I'm working, I'm doing my job, okay? An adverse reaction is different. An adverse reaction is difficulty in breathing, it is having hives, it is developing a rash all over the body, or anaphylactic shock, right? And so that's very different, right? And so if we think about an adverse reaction, it would be like having a reaction to some food that you're allergic to. Okay? Yep.
You guys have the slides?
No.
I just put it on, it should be there.
Okay.
Did you open up
No, I
today's?
just printed it out, man.
Huh?
I printed it out a couple of days ago.
Yeah, so I update my slides every once in a while, and I knew Cindy was gonna ask about it, so I went ahead and updated everything on Blackboard. Okay? So, one of the more serious adverse reaction is Guillain-Barré syndrome. Now, Guillain-Barré syndrome, how many people have heard of it? Guillain-Barré syndrome can be brought on by infections by bacteria and viruses, but it can also be brought on by the immunological response that we have to a vaccine. Right? 1 out of every 100,000 individuals who gets a vaccine is going to have an adverse reaction. That's why I always tell you all that I always tell people, if you're going to get a vaccine, you want to sit in that particular clinic or whatever for about 15 minutes. If you're going to have an adverse reaction, it's going to probably happen within the first 5 minutes. Guillain-Barré is a little bit different. Over a period of time, your immune system starts to attack the nerves. And so you start to have damage to the nerves, right? At least for the covering of the nerves, right? Which then leads to tingling of a sensation of the body, and eventually you could have either temporary or long-term paralyzation because of it, right? It is very rare, but it does happen. Okay? Good? So, and we think about this, then the other thing that the anti-vaxxers will say, well, you know, the government had to come up with this whole new thing called VAERS because there was so many adverse reactions that were happening. That's not why VAERS started. VAERS started as an education tool, but eventually it became more because there were so many people who were trying to sue drug companies over the fact that they got sore arms, right?
Oh my God.
It's true, it's true. So now VAERS, what they do is if you have a complaint against a vaccine,
The VAERS report, I've heard about that a
Mhm.
lot.
If you have any kind of problem with the vaccine, you can file with VAERS, and what they do is they'll look at it, and if they do feel like you have a case, then some people are gonna do it anyway, some people are just gonna bring a lawsuit. And here's the troubling thing, right? If you sue a big drug company, the big drug companies, if you don't know this, have already taken a large chunk of money and put it into an investment, basically, so that if you sue them, a lot of times they don't want the negative publicity, right? So they'll just simply settle out of court with you, and they'll make you really happy. But to me, that's just really wrong. My uncle, he was in the hospital and he slipped and hit his head and he died.
Oh my God.
And my aunt called me up and said, we need to go talk to the hospital, they wanna talk to us. The hospital, of course, was doing mitigation. They were trying to figure out if we were gonna sue or not, right? And they asked some questions, and then my aunt pulled me aside and said, what are they asking about it? And I said, they wanna know if you're gonna sue them. And she looked at them and she said, we don't sue people, right? We know that you were doing the best you could. My husband got up and he fell. It's not your fault. And that was it. But lots of people will sue you for just about anything,
Yeah.
right? I even had to take out insurance for my teaching because one student one time basically said they were gonna sue me because they didn't get the grade they wanted to. I learned my lesson. I just simply took out an insurance policy. So don't try to sue me because of that.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about
That whole process has got a bunch of lawyers now. I just have to do is tell them, this is it, and I take care of business. But I pay for that.
Wow.
It's just the way we are as Americans. We want to take care of each other and sue each other.
But even if you sue them, won't you lose because they have more money than you?
What do you mean? The
Like-
drug companies?
Yeah, like if you sue a hospital or a drug company.
So the drug companies are not really interested in winning a $100,000 lawsuit against you. They don't care. But if you do something like J&J, so first of all, okay, I'm gonna tell you something, and it's my opinion. That's not what's out there. But do you remember the talcum powder baby
Yes.
was causing cervical cancer? There's no way that could happen. It didn't make a difference. J&J did not want the publicity.
But they got it anyway then.
Yeah, they got a lot of it.
Because there was so many cases against them that they had to counter, right? That's the only reason. They would have just settled out of court very nicely and quietly. But because people started to see that oh, they're just giving money away, a lot of people started suing, and I think they still are, right? And so they went to court. It's really sad. Well, it's just the way it is in America. You know, people don't win the lottery, but they want the lottery, so they figure out another way. Just my opinion. Okay, I know Tamisha's recording me, so. Okay, so let's talk about herd immunity. What do you know about it?
That if the general population is vaccinated.
If we can target, I like to see 80%. If we can target 80% of the population and get them protected, then the people who cannot take vaccines will be protected because you stop the transmission. This particular term was actually borrowed from the ranchers because the ranchers could not afford to vaccinate all their head of cattle, so they targeted 60 or 70%. And then it was protected usually against anthrax or things like that, right? This is the same process here. So we want 80, I'd love to get 90, but we're not even at 50, right? So we're gonna have COVID in our population for a long time. Right? That's just the way it is. So with vaccines, you know, I get them from both sides. I get them from the far right, people that I know, they basically say, well, no, I should not be mandated to get a vaccine. It's my body, it's my children, I'm gonna govern what goes into my body, you know, all this other stuff, right? Fine. And then from the far left, you get people that basically do a lot of research and they'll say things like, you know, I've done a lot of research and I'm not gonna get my child vaccinated because the vaccines are things like for diphtheria, and we haven't had a case of diphtheria in the United States in over 60 years. So why do I wanna put my child under the possibility they could have an anaphylactic reaction? So that's a really good argument. I can't really argue against that, that's really good. But what I tell them is the reason that we don't have diphtheria here, and we haven't had it here for 60 years, because it's still a problem in Russia, and it's still a problem in China, and other places. But the reason we haven't had it here is because our vaccine programs work so well, right? And so I have a hard time getting them open, because if you talk to people, I just don't want the vaccine, I might get sick, Jalen, right? I don't think the flu vaccine works, I may have side effects. No, you will have side effects, right? But side effects, they think it's adverse reactions. I'm allergic to the vaccine. That's a good one. If you say you're allergic to the vaccine, you're allergic to the component vaccine, you should not take the vaccine. That's why we try to develop herd immunity.
Is it those also like the immunocompromised individuals
Like, what do you mean?
that they can't take it? That's why herd
Yeah.
immunity is important.
Right. Even if a advanced HIV/AIDS patient takes it, they wouldn't develop immunity against it. Right.
Is that only if you have AIDS or HIV, or does it matter?
AIDS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So HIV, they should
Yeah, you should
still
still
take
take
it.
it. So other things, like there could be lupus, there's a bunch of other things that might interfere with that. You might be taking chemotherapeutic drugs for cancer, and your immune system is so wiped out that you won't like it. You shouldn't take it. Okay? So, here is data that was published from the National Geographic. I think everybody will agree the National Geographic is a pretty reputable organization, right?
Oh, yeah.
So if we look here, you can see some of the major infectious agents that used to kill a lot of people. I mean, this is from the US population only, and so you can see rubella in the 1970s, we're having a lot of problems with it. We took the vaccine. The darker circle is when we started the vaccine program. Look at it. We hadn't had a case of rubella in a long time. Mumps, same way. Mumps is interesting because in the last 2 years, about this time, they've had one case of mumps on the UT campus in the last 2 years. But for some reason, it was just one case. They did a real good job of sequestering that individual. Now, we didn't have any other problems. But just think about how many people are not vaccinated against mumps that are that age.
Could that be because that they didn't get vaccinated, like as kids or something like
Probably,
that?
probably. Hepatitis B, hepatitis A, measles is a big one, right? So measles is completely almost gone away. Now, recently, we've had outbreaks in the last 2 years. We've had an outbreak in New York, right? Mostly with some of the Jewish community that their religious beliefs do not believe in vaccinations, right? There are a lot of other religious groups that believe that. And then there was a group of individuals in Oregon and in different places, right? That there was an outbreak. Chicago was the last one, I think. They had a big outbreak of people who were clustered around an area, because of their beliefs, they were getting vaccinated. They got exposed to measles and a bunch of people got it, right?
So how do you get exposed to measles if you don't have like, if, I don't know.
How do you get exposed to measles?
Yeah, like
When did the
if
first one
Some
start
kid
happening?
comes in contact with you and is prodromal, doesn't have the clinical symptoms but is infectious. Diphtheria, here you can see, look at diphtheria. We knocked it out in the 50s, and look, we haven't had a case a long time. Whooping cough is a different, look at the increase. So what's going on with whooping cough? Well, there's two hypotheses. One is that the organism has changed, has become more virulent. And the other one is that the vaccine needs to be updated. And so there are people working on the vaccine to see if they can update it. And then polio, you can see that we just completely took care of polio in the United States. We haven't had a case of polio in a long, long time. I have a friend who works here, who is in a wheelchair. She grew up in South America and she got polio and it was paralytic. And so she's in a wheelchair. And I used to have her come in and talk to a student. I haven't had that done in a while. But it's important. She can remember these big old large ships coming from the United States where they would dock right off the coast and people would go on these ships and they would get treatment and things like that, right? I don't know if you guys know, we'll talk about polio more when we talk about infectious processes of viruses in the next unit. But it's degenerative, and there are still a few people who are in iron lungs. Do you know what that is?
Still?
the things that are,
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
But there are only 2 people in the entire world that can service those things.
Oh, shit.
So, yeah, they're
What?
pretty busy. There are only 2 people in the entire world that can
Iron
service those
lungs.
things. Yes,
2 questions. One, are all these, contagious? And, second question, were any of them, like a, pandemic, like COVID?
polio was pandemic a long time ago. Diphtheria was pandemic a long time ago. And those are the only 2 that I can think of. They're all contagious and infectious in different ways. So some of them are respiratory routes, hepatitis A, saliva, hepatitis B, blood product, rubella, airborne, mumps, airborne, varicella, chickenpox, airborne. There's a lot of different routes there. Polio, how do you get polio? If you were gonna get polio, how would you get it? It's fecal oral route, which a lot of people don't know.
Not washing your hands after you poop?
So there's still small pockets of polio in the world, mostly in the Middle East and Africa. And we were hoping to get rid of polio off of the face of the earth this year. But because of the pandemic and because of the problem with the vaccine that I talked about, that wasn't made properly, there are outbreaks, there's small little clusters of infection and polio in the world. Yes, ma'am?
so, back to, booster shots and everything. So when we take the flu shot every year, is that considered a booster shot?
No.
It's like bringing back that immunity or what?
So, the flu vaccine is made every year against the 3 or 4 most common strains of influenza that are being seen in the Southern Hemisphere during their flu season.
Okay.
And so we're looking at them and working with the World Health Organization. We're looking for the 3 to 4 most common strains, and then we make the vaccine against that. So every year it's gonna be different because every year there's a different, and sometimes we get it right, and we get 70% efficacy, and we're happy. One year, about 5 or 6 years ago, it was completely wrong, and the flu vaccine only had about a 34% efficacy. I'd still take it. but it was a Texas bee virus that really caused most of the problems that year. Yes. Oh, I thought I saw you right there. Any questions?
So like with the COVID vaccine, so with the COVID vaccine, like the boosters and then all of that, since there's strains of COVID, like why?
No. So we're doing this because remember I told you that those phase 3 clinical trials, they're still following those people, and what they found out was the IgG has been lowered in their bodies
That's
over a year time. And so they're giving a booster just to boost the immune system against the same strain. We might have to take a vaccine against another strain
Okay, yeah.
because I think I have this data somewhere, but the last time I read about how many mutations had occurred in COVID-19 had been over 30,000 mutations. But we only talk about the ones that are really problematic.
Are mutations and strains the same thing?
No. So there can be mutations that happen, but we don't strain the virus. The only time we will give it a strain is when it's a problem for us. So anytime you see a virus or a bacterium that has a strain, that means that it was significant enough in the pathology that we had to identify it in some way. Okay? Yes?
Were we able to get, I mean, we pretty much got rid of polio and diphtheria. Is that because we had to give it enough time because they happened a long time ago? Because you say COVID's going to be around for a while, but diphtheria and polio got eradicated. So
In those days, Miss Carolina, the vaccines were mandated. The entire population had to get them, and it was a different time because I was right at the end of that when I was born. But if you talk to your parents, or maybe your parents are too young, but maybe your grandparents, they will tell you that in the time of polio was so devastating that people stood in long lines to get the vaccine. So they were much more willing to get a vaccine back then than they are today, right? For lots of different reasons, I guess, but yeah. Okay, so we still believe that we can get rid of polio, which would be a good thing. The last infectious disease that we got rid of the planet of the earth was smallpox. And so there are two of them that we're trying to get rid of. Polio is one of them, and the other one probably is going to be before polio is the New Guinea worm. And I think we're probably going to get rid of the New Guinea worm within the next year, right? Which would be a great thing. What's that? Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So the other thing I get from people is, well, my child, I'm really worried about them because they're very aggressive with this vaccine schedule, right? And so if you look at it, yeah, it could be pretty aggressive, right? So what I tell people is like, well, if you're really worried about the vaccine schedule being so aggressive, just back off a little bit, and instead of getting all the vaccines that are recommended at a time, get one or two, and then come back in 2 weeks and get the others. I said, but you have to be comfortable with what you want to do, right? So I'm not going to mention any names, but there's somebody in here who's going to take their kiddos to get vaccinated shortly after class today. And I know that they're going to sit down there and wait until about 15 minutes to make sure nothing happens to those kiddos, right? And so that's my recommendation to everybody. So I like vaccines, big proponent from, I like GMOs. So my lemon tree has fruited, and I have a lot of lemons on this lemon tree, and on Sunday I picked one, and it is about 4 inches in length. It's huge. It's a GMO. It's a Meyer lemon tree, but it's a GMO. It's probably been crossed with an orange, but it's a lemon.
Yeah, there's one, a friend of mine had them and they were awesome.
Yeah. I protect this lemon tree all the time, right? So in the freeze, I put a tent over it, I put covers on top of the tent, and I brought in I took all the Christmas lights out, put them in there, and turned them on inside so it could get warmth, and it made it through the freeze. My neighbor had a tree, mine's a little bush, it's about this high and it goes out this way, but mostly because I want to be able to put a tent on it, right? But my next door neighbor had a tree and it froze and it didn't come back. So,
But they totally went, we had to take them all the way underground.
yeah.
And they're
Yeah,
not
so
there.
my
They were
loquats
huge.
did that. My loquats went all the way, it wouldn't come back. So I cut it and it's coming up out of the ground again. We planted the loquats for the squirrels because we wanted them to take the loquats and leave our pecans alone.
How well did that work?
Well, they got them both, right? So,
Are loquats nuts?
no, loquats are, some people call them Chinese
Oh, I
palms.
see them, yeah. These little things.
Mhm, yeah.
My
They're
mom
really
used to make me
good.
steal them.
They're really good.
She would.
She did a good job.
So I leave you, as we leave the immune system with what what's all about to take on a non-self entity.
That's it?
And, well, now we're gonna do epidemiology. Any questions? Oh, that's all right. So, first of all, we've gotten to this point because we've talked about what the cells are structured like. We talked about what they need to grow and how we can control them. We talked about their DNA. We talked about the different groups. Now we look at the immune system, and now we're going to look at community health. Community health is really epidemiology, right? It's the study of the distribution of infectious disease, or any disease in a population. But it's really about the differences between being in a disease state versus being healthy, okay? So if we think about this, right, it's about the infectious agent getting in the body, taking hold and causing problems, right? The infectious process. But with epidemiology, it's looking at the entire population of the community as a whole, not the individual, right? So we're gonna talk about community health, epidemiology, and then we're gonna go into talking about individual infections and how the infectious agents interact with the body. That's the last one. Okay? So when we talk about infectious disease, we categorize them in lots of different ways. We can categorize them by taxonomy. So there's an outbreak of shigellosis or salmonellosis or giardiasis or tuberculosis, right? So these are all organisms and we're doing it by taxonomy, right? Good. We can classify them by which body system they're infecting. So a person has gastritis, they have encephalitis, they have colitis, they have enteritis, they have gastroenterocolitis. You know, you can just go on and on and on about the different places that conjunctivitis, the different places that these infectious agents can cause problems. We can talk about them in longevity or severity. So chronic versus acute, right? Chronic is long-term. Acute is a sudden effect that the body's going through. And a lot of times it can be very dramatic.
What does longevity mean again?
How long? Okay? We can talk about how they're spread. Are they contagious or non-contagious? Are communicable, non-communicable? Are they spread by vector? Are they spread by reservoir? Are they spread by droplet nuclei? Are they spread by foodborne, airborne? You could go on and on and on and on. Okay? And then lastly, we can classify them by how they are affecting a population. And when we say that, we're talking about, is it a short-term increase? We call that an epidemic. Is the infectious agent in a given geographical location or population all the time? Endemic. Or is it worldwide? Pandemic. Okay? So if we think about this, the study of epidemics is the study is interested in how infectious agents, and really all diseases, how they're spread in a population. Right? It is a study of comparisons. You have to know what's there already in order to understand whether or not you're having an increase, right? So what is an epidemic? 1,000 cases of influenza in July, or 1 case of measles in February. Which one's an epidemic?
1,000 cases.
One.
To the population. So you said 1,000 and what?
1,000 cases of influenza in July,
Okay, or,
1 case of measles in February.
One?
Oh, the one
A
case.
big difference. We have a summer flu season, and 1,000 cases in July is it's just noise, it's normal.
Normal.
But we never have measles. So one case of measles, it's like, oh hell, where is it? And how much of that population is at risk because they're not vaccinated? I mean, you have to think about all these things going on.
Something abnormal?
Huh?
Something abnormal.
Something abnormal.
So
But we don't call it abnormal. We call it a spike or an outbreak, right? Yeah. Yes, Jalen?
I got it. So wait, Ebola would be considered a, like. Ebola
One case of Ebola,
going to Dallas, that would be an epidemic, or like?
in Dallas, it was an epidemic,
Okay,
not in Austin.
okay.
But, because we had one case, we never have a case of Ebola. It's in comparison. What's there normally?
So we had Ebola in Austin?
No.
Is that what you said was normal?
No, you misunderstood.
I missed
There
that.
was a case of Ebola in
Yeah, I
Dallas.
know that.
That was an epidemic in Dallas.
Right.
But it wasn't an epidemic here because we didn't have any,
Okay.
okay? Good? Well, people were calling me on the phone, like students I haven't heard for in 8 years. Proby, what should we be doing about the cases in Dallas? I go, case of what? Ebola. I'm like, are you gonna go to Dallas? No. I was like, well, don't do anything. You know?
Texas is Texas.
But people do travel a lot.
Yeah, but these guys weren't gonna go to Dallas. I mean,
But then someone could come from Dallas to Austin.
okay, fine. Let's just say Cheska's driving the van and she's taking us all to Dallas. There's a case of Ebola there. What do?
Don't go.
Nothing. We just go to Dallas and we eat lunch somewhere and because Ebola is only infectious to caregivers. And we're not gonna give any care to the patient. Right? Good? Now, if there was an outbreak of meningitis, I would put holes in all the tires so you wouldn't go. Okay? Are you with me? Because that thing is just downright nasty. It'll kill you. Okay? So if we think about this, let me go back here. Anybody know what this is? It's a
Oh,
well.
that's-
Yeah, what is it? Jalen, you got all excited.
That's like back in the old days, they would put.
Back in the old days.
Yeah, they would put like the smoke in it, and they thought it would cleanse the air.
Oh, yeah, no,
But
no.
there's like something dead pumping the
Oh,
That's
water?
right. That's death.
Right.
That's death.
Oh.
This is the pump. Jalen got all excited. This is the pump in London, Greater London,
It's just like
Broad
the
Street.
nursery rhymes that are about.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
But so Dr. Snow, who's known as the father of epidemiology, what he noticed was there was a lot of cases of cholera. And he said, well, what's causing this? He took a map of Greater London and he put a little dot everywhere there was a case of cholera. And he figured out that what they all had in common was this pump in the middle of Broad Street. That pump is still there. It's a historical marker. But, because I saw it. I went up and I held it, I touched it, I kissed it. Because, that's my thing. But, people wanted to go to all these other places. I'm like, I'm going here. I'm like, why are you going there? Because there's my pump there and I want to take a picture of it. So,
I bet
but,
he dressed up like a virus.
So anyway, the legend has it that Dr. Snow basically told the people who were in charge of the city that this was the cause of cholera. And they didn't do anything. So legend has it that he went over there and he broke the pump, took the handle off, broke it. Nobody could get water from it anymore and cholera went away.
Wow.
It's a study not only of comparisons and the distribution of disease in a population, it's a study of intervention, right? How do we intervene to stop the spread of the infection? Now think about that for a minute. And what's going on with COVID right now? What are the major interventions that we have for COVID? Mask, they work, social distancing, and a vaccine. Okay?
So cholera was a virus?
Cholera is a bacteria.
Oh, okay. So it was inside of the pump, like in the
It was in
tubing?
the water. It was in the water.
Oh.
So they
Somehow or another, the water got contaminated.
Oh.
And it's easy to do. So let's talk about that in recent times. So you might know what's going on in Haiti, right? Haiti can't catch a break. They had a major earthquake, and then a year later, they had a major hurricane, and they were just getting back on their feet, kinda, and then they had another major earthquake, and then their president got assassinated. Right, so not only are they having economic and disaster turmoil, but now they're having political turmoil also.
And pandemic.
So the United Nations went there. They sent a envoy from different places. One of them was from Africa, and there was cholera in this part of Africa that was again strained. And if it had a strain, Cheska, what does that mean? If there was a strain of cholera, Vibrio cholerae, and had a strain, what does that mean? It's so bad we had to give it a strain. We had to follow it. Well, these people from Africa, when they went there, they were surprised that there were no latrines. There were no place to go to the bathroom. Right? So what they did was they would go in the woods. Well, there was a big rainstorm, and all of the feces got washed into the water basin, and then people started drinking the water, and they all got cholera.
Oh my God.
And this cholera was from the strain that was only found in Africa at the time. Okay? So it was a big problem. So if you have money and live in Haiti, you had a latrine, but you didn't clean out your own latrine, you would pay people minimal amount of money to come and clean it. And those people had kind of a job where you would go to bed at night, you didn't know, but they would come over at late at night, and they would take all the feces out of your latrine in buckets and put it into a bigger container, and then they were supposed to take this feces and dump it into this big old area where it would be burned. Probably that wasn't happening, right? It was being spilled because it spread all over. So these people, I think they're called Wakayu, somebody can look it up for me, but they're considered to be kind of mythical people who clean out the latrines. And even though they didn't show any signs of cholera, they were carriers. So they were spreading it in the population. So it's pretty interesting story.
Bayaku, B-A-Y-A-K-O-U.
So I remember the story a little bit better than I thought. So it's an amazing thing that happens with these infectious agents, right? And that shows you how things can be reservoirs and carriers for things that shouldn't even be in that environment. They came from a different place. Okay? So here's what snow did, right? And it's all here, and then we figure this out. We're always trying to figure out who patient 0 is, right? First patient. Because if we can find that out, then we can intervene, right? There was a long time, there was a gentleman who we thought was patient 0 for a long time for HIV. Anybody know who that was? His name was Gaten Duga. He was a very handsome man, a gay man, and he was a air steward, and so he would go all over the world, and he was pretty promiscuous. Very good looking dude. You can look him up. Gaten Duga. Here, I'll spell his name for you.
Is this based off the movie where one of the first HIV movies came
Yep.
out and they were looking
Oh
for
wow, he
him?
was handsome.
What was the name of that movie?
And the band played on.
That's
It's a good movie.
Yeah, it
He's
is.
white.
Yeah, he's.
We watched it in school. I remember.
But so he was like given this kind of, he was patient 0 for a long time. He's not anymore. We know that it was somebody else because we did a lot of testing through DNA. But Gaten Duga for a long time got a bad rap. He died, of course, from HIV. But when the CDC, this is how interesting this is. When the CDC first interviewed him, they asked him to write down the name of his partners that he had had for the last 3 months. And his response was, I can't remember. There have been thousands of people. The dude was busy. Are you with me? So you can see that even though he wasn't patient 0, that in those early days of the HIV epidemic, it spread very quickly because of the way people were
Sexually
were
active.
interacting with each other. And I told you the story about the bathhouses, right? When I went to San Francisco.
No.
Oh, I didn't tell you this story.
Go ahead, go ahead.
So my wife, I went to a nerd conference with my wife. It was about forensics, and I went for the first 3 days. The last day was about ballistics, and I didn't care anything about ballistics. So
What's
we went
ballistics?
there. I dropped her off. I gave her a kiss, and I basically said, "Okay, I'll see you at dinner tonight." She goes, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm gonna go walk San Francisco. I'm gonna go." I'm gonna go to the Castro. Does anybody know what the Castro
Oh
is?
my lord, the gay street.
That's it.
Uh,
I'm gonna go to the Castro because it's really the Castro, but you know, people don't call it the Castro, they call it the Castro. I'm gonna go to the Castro because I want to see the bathhouses, right? So I went, I walked up. Now the whole city. Finally got to the Castro, and I was looking in the window of the bathhouse because they were all locked. I was looking in the window. What's going on in there? There was nothing, right? They were all locked up. But these two guys came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm a microbiologist. I'm really interested in the bathhouses because, you know, I like to experience things so that I can be able to talk about it." And one of the guys pulled away. The other guy kept talking to me. This other guy was a real estate agent. He called one of his friends. His friend came over and opened up the bathhouse for me.
Oh, that's so cool.
I got in the bath and got down there. They took pictures of me down in the bath. So, you know, to me it was just really cool that I got to experience that thing, right? And so we stayed there for about an hour. I talked, you know, and they said, well, they've all been closed a long time now because of that. And some of these are kind of, you know, protected areas for our community because of what happened here. And so nothing's ever going to be built here because this is hallowed ground for a lot of people who lost their lives, right? So it's pretty interesting. And then they said, well, what are you doing now? I said, oh, I'm just going to walk down there and see what's going on. They said, we're going to have a party. You want to come? I'm like, okay. So I went to a party and hung out with a bunch of gay guys for like 3 hours. I was just hanging out with them and having a good time. They were not. I kept up with them for several years, and I kind of lost track with them. But I got home that evening, and my wife said, "You don't look like you're ready for dinner." I'm like, "Oh, I've been hanging out with the gay guys all day. They fed me really well. But I will go out to eat with you, and I'll just watch, right?" And so, but that was one of the best times. And of all the really cool science that went on that particular day, that particular week, I'm always going to remember my time in the Castro because it was a great time.
But what happened in the bathhouse?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
What
my
is a
question.
bathhouse?
So
I know.
in the time when the gay movement was really ramping up in the late 70s, early 80s, the bathhouses were a symbol of liberation for the gay community, especially the gay men. And what they would do is they would go to these bathhouses to be with each other, and
Like-
not to drink coffee. You know
Like
what I'm talking
sex?
about? Yeah.
Okay.
So they would get in the bathtub and then say, "You look really nice. Would you like to go talk? Let's go talk." Yeah. So they would go in these little rooms and they would talk. You know? And so the CDC wanted to close all the bathhouses, but the politicians in San Francisco wouldn't do it because then they wouldn't get reelected, right? So politics played a huge role in this. Politics played a huge role in the spread of HIV because we could have stopped it.
Oh, yeah,
But there were two major roadblocks. One of them was the gay population didn't want to be put, as they said, back in the closet. They wanted to be liberated. And the other thing is the president at the time, I'm not going to mention any names, Reagan.
You on camera? No.
Wouldn't do anything because it was against his base to do anything that had AIDS or HIV in it. So the president at that time claimed that they had millions of dollars towards research to HIV/AIDS, but really what they were doing was research on the common cold. And since the common cold also suppresses the immune response, they considered it the same thing. So HIV got out of control. We could have stopped it. We did. We haven't learned our lesson. Because here we are with COVID, and we could have stopped it. But I'm gonna, one guy, I'm not gonna mention any names, but you know who he is. Basically said it was like the flu. And his whole base basically said
Even though he put money to help.
people were gargling with bleach, and some of them died. Yeah, there was all kinds of things that happened.
With COVID?
for COVID. Because some guy, I'm not gonna mention his name, but you know who he is.
That's funny that you say that because my mom actually was taking shots of bleach.
Oh, my God.
And I know she okay, I know it's funny. I'm laughing. But it's because we didn't know anything about it.
You mean like this? She was taking shots
No,
of
she
bleach?
put a little bit of, she put water and she would dilute it. And I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? She was like, I'm drinking bleach, man, because I don't know how you get COVID. And, you know, I work with COVID patients, and what if I drink it in? But nothing happened to her. And then my other sister, registered nurse Wendy, she was like, hi, Mom, this is when we first, COVID had started. She's like, Mom, every single time I leave a COVID patient's house, I rub alcohol inside my nostrils just in case the
Oh, my
and I know it's funny, and you guys are probably like, what the heck? But they didn't know, you know, and it's just, it's funny to
Well,
me now.
but you had the leader of
Exactly.
our country saying that that's what they
Exactly.
should do.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you really believed in him, and a lot of people believe in him,
But
you're
it's,
gonna do that.
and it
I
was
still
scary.
What's that?
I said, and it was scary. Like, people were dying and going on ventilators, so it's like,
Oh, I know. We took all the, like, we were one of those people that took the
I
waters
didn't
and
use
everything.
bleach at all. Okay, just didn't. Just didn't.
No,
So we're gonna talk about reproductive number. You guys know about this already. We talked about it before.
wait.
But reproductive number is how it spreads. So again, if you think about people who said that COVID is just like the flu, here's the difference, right? So flu, if you have it, you can spread it to about one person. COVID, it's been updated. You can spread it to about 3 people. Hospital or incubation period for flu is about 4 days, 1 to 4 days. For COVID, it's about 1 to 14 days. So, you know, you could be infectious and be spreading it and not know you have it. Okay? Hospitalization for flu, 2%, but for COVID-19, 19%. Case fatality rate for flu is about less than 0.1%. For COVID, it's about 2%. So of all the people who developed COVID, 2% died. And I read a recent article, a scientific article, that basically said that if you are unvaccinated, you're 20 times more likely to die than if you're vaccinated.
That's so scary.
Hold on, say that again.
Huh?
Can you repeat that?
So if you are unvaccinated, you're 20 times more likely to die than if you are vaccinated. Okay? So epidemic is a short-term increase in a given population of an infectious agent, right? So usually these come, something happens, and it goes away, right? And so we have them all the time. We have outbreaks all the time, huh? But the flu, it depends, right? Right. So it'd be more like whooping cough, right? So if you have 20 cases of whooping cough in Austin, Texas, that's an epidemic. Okay? Good. Endemic is something that's there all the time, right? So if we think about that, right? Ebola in Africa, but not in Dallas, right? Lyme disease in Texas and rabies in Austin because of the bats. Now, here's the deal. If you find a dead bat, I'm about 99.9% sure that bat died of rabies.
What?
I'm 99.9% sure that that bat died of rabies. You should never touch wildlife.
I always say never touch a dead bird, right?
Huh?
Never, they always say never touch a dead bird, because they carry so many.
They do carry things, but I would touch a dead bird. I would touch a dead rat before I would touch a dead bat. Yep.
What about like if your cat like hunts birds and brings them?
One more time,
What
Gio?
if your cat is like an outside cat and they
Yeah.
hunt birds? and
Yeah,
they
they'll bring birds home.
Is that a concern or no?
Sorry, can I say that?
It could be, but yeah, that cats think that they brought you a present, right? They want to be petted and told they're a good kitty, right? Because they did that. But really, you should just kind of bury or throw the bird away. What I usually do is I throw it in the back of my property and let the other animals eat it. So we have coyotes and all kinds of things that come out there.
My cat brought me a cockroach one time.
A cockroach?
Yeah, it was alive. But she wanted me to like throw it so she could play with it, you know.
That's a playful kitty, right?
Yeah.
So I think I told you that a cat has adopted my wife. Oh my God, this cat now it's got a name. It's named Charlotte. My wife named it Charlotte. And so, you know, if you name a cat, well, it becomes yours.
Yeah, they look like.
So it's amazing. Yep.
My cat brought a rat.
Yeah. Lizards, snakes, rats, birds. It happens. Pandemic means that there is a worldwide distribution, and the official definition is we want to see it. Well, I mean, we'll call it a pandemic nowadays, but we want to see it on all the continents except Antarctica, because Antarctica is so sparsely populated and it's so cold that if there's cases there, fine, but if there's not any, we're still going to call it a pandemic. Right now, there are 3 pandemics: HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and COVID.
So tuberculosis here though isn't all that bad though, right? That's what
It's
Tdap is for.
not a good infection to have.
So that's still around, like,
A lot.
Wow.
A lot. So, I mean, and when you think about it, if we say that less than 1% of the population in the United States has tuberculosis, even though that's a lot to me, that's not very many at all, right, to the entire population. So people aren't gonna be worried about it. And if you wanna get TB, Keon, all you have to do is get incarcerated for a weekend, and you probably pick it up. Are you with me?
It's in jails and stuff?
Big time.
That's horrible.
But why?
Because of close quarters, and the people who are in the jails, a lot of times they don't know they have it.
I'm sorry, just the way you say, hey, you want to get TV? Go to jail. So just.
I'm just saying it's the truth, right? One of my colleagues, his name is Dr. Rodney Rohde, he did a study of tuberculosis in jails. And so,
A lot of it's tattoos too, right?
what do you
That
mean?
has it, when they get those tattoos in jail?
Oh, okay, I don't know anything
Or
about
is that hemp?
Or that-
Maybe
yeah,
I'm getting
that-
It might be
confused.
head.
So I do worry about tattoos a little bit if they're like homegrown tattoos. Not for tuberculosis, but for HIV and hepatitis B.
Oh, okay, it's hemp, okay.
Who did you just
Tuberculosis.
name?
What's that?
Who did you just name?
One more time?
You just said my favorite. Did you say microbiologist? You just named somebody.
Oh, Dr. Rodney Rohde?
Yeah, does he work for ACC too?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
He's
I
an
don't think I
adjunct.
had him.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah, he is.
He and I went to grad school together.
Oh,
We took
really?
different paths. He's a superstar.
Yeah, he was like all into the COVID. He was writing all kinds of stuff regarding it, and
He's
like.
very prolific.
Mhm.
He writes about everything. I went a different route. I went into industry, and when I wrote papers and gave them to people, it was their property. I could never present it.
Mm.
So my CV is very small compared to his. It's this long.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the work that I did was all belonged to the companies I worked for.
Yeah.
And I had to get special permission to go and present them. And a lot of times they would say no.
Yeah.
You can go to the conference, but you can't present. Thanks. Because we were doing a lot of really cool stuff. It's amazing. Here are some patterns, right? So you might know this one, right? This is endemic. It's in Texas up through New Mexico, Arizona, and to California. Can you tell me which infectious agent, Jalen, is that? You know it, you've seen it. Anybody? Anybody know?
Flu?
No. It's a fungus found in soil, gets distributed by dust.
Oh.
Wait, what was it? Repeat it.
Is it an
You
allergy?
forgot everything. Oh my God, -10 for you.
What was the question? What was the question?
Coccidioides immitis. This is valley fever.
Oh.
Oh my God.
I knew it was fever.
I'm doing a
something.
terrible job of teaching people.
Because you took the cheating sheet from us.
Oh, that's why you don't know it. Okay. So here's an epidemic. Now these might be, you know, it might be salmonella here. It might be whooping cough. It could be whatever. And then there's sporadic. Even if these are all whooping cough, are they related? Probably not. Right. So it's sporadic. And then you can see pandemic, all the continents except Antarctica. Okay.
Except for,
Antarctica.
Oh.
So here's some terms: morbidity and mortality. Morbidity is the number of cases in a population. Mortality is the number of deaths. Good? And they're usually given as rates. So here's an example. The morbidity of whooping cough in Austin, Texas is 1 for every 100,000 individuals. What did I just say? How many cases of,
One out of every 100,000.
how many cases are in Austin, Texas of whooping cough?
How many people are in Austin?
Huh?
How many people are in Austin?
10.
1 million. 10, that is correct. That is correct. We talk in code. The first rule of epidemiology is do not get the population excited. Right, so therefore we talk in code. Right? Because all the people are gonna hear is what? One.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Is there really 1 million people in Austin?
In the greater Austin area.
That
yeah.
is
It's
disgusting.
10th or 9th in the US.
Oh, I didn't know it
You
was
said
that
that's
big.
Yeah,
disgusting.
it's 10th or
I mean,
9th.
it's not even, it's number 4 in Texas.
Houston,
El Paso's bigger.
no, Houston is bigger.
Well, Houston,
San Antonio is bigger than
No.
so
bigger
the
than
four,
Austin.
the 4 cities that are bigger than
Yeah.
Austin and Texas are El
Houston,
Paso.
Dallas,
Dallas.
Houston, Austin.
The DW4, the complex, Houston and San Antonio.
Yeah.
They're all bigger.
the top 10
Let me look it
in
up.
US.
Okay, look it up. Check it out. So here's what you have to be worried about, right? Because here is some data.
No, for real.
Here is some data. And if you look at this data, you're thinking, what? Oh my God, HPV is the most important sexually transmitted infection. It's important, but it's not the most important. To me, it's this one, right there. Most important one. Most common. And I worked, remember I told you I was working to try to help diabetic patients and they made me the STI guy. I never saw a case of trichomoniasis ever, but I saw a lot of chlamydia. One of the ladies who, in the morning class who works in the reproductive units, she's saying that they're seeing a lot more cases of antibiotic resistant gonorrhea, which is troubling. I mean, I knew it was out there, but I think they're seeing quite a bit of it now. Right. So again, ladies and gentle dudes, if you're gonna play,
Wrap it up.
yeah, that's exactly right. No glove, no love. And remember, if it doesn't look right, it doesn't smell right, stay the hell away from it. Okay? Good? Here's 2 other terms, again, talking called prevalence and incidence. Prevalence is the number of total cases of an infectious disease in a population. Incidence is the number of new cases. So Cindy, if I say things like this, the prevalence of whooping cough is 40, but the incidence is 3, am I worried or not?
Yes.
Why?
Yeah, why you answer?
Sorry. Because you have you have 40 cases already that are sick, and then 3 that are.
Of those 40, only 3 of them are new. So
Yes.
if we were in an epidemic, we're on the downside. Nice job. 1 point for everybody, because Angela's a superstar. Okay? So what if I said, no.
No, 1, and you said 3 today. So
It's
full-
already, the 3 was already in. It's already in there. Okay, now, listen.
The review.
So what if I said the incidence of whooping cough is 40, I'm sorry, the prevalence is 40, but the incidence is 35, now what? That's a problem, right? Because of the 40 cases, 35 of them are new, we are in deep trouble.
That means it's moving
75.
fast.
And it's moving fast in the population. Good? So you see how we can use these terms, right? We can track things, and most of the time our data is tracked passively, unfortunately, but it would cost way too much money to track it actively. So here we can over a period of time, right? Here we can do it by state, here we can do it by the months of the year, and here we can do it by age group. Something very interesting is happening in the 55 and older population is for sexually transmitted infections, we're seeing a spike in that population.
Of course.
What do you think is going on?
Divorce.
I'm sure that plays with it.
Viagra,
Viagra is a big deal. It's the driver, right?
literal driver.
Wait. Can you repeat that?
Viagra.
So we're seeing a spike in sexually transmitted infections in the older population, 55 plus,
Oh.
and it's Viagra.
They're like, we don't care.
Huh?
They have heart problems.
I didn't hear what you
Some
said.
people die for
They
that.
have heart problems.
They're getting their youth back.
You don't brag right.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting because do you know what Viagra first started out?
Yeah, it was
It was a cardiac medicine.
Yeah, that's hard.
But it
And what they found out is that nurses would notice that when they gave Viagra to help the heart, it also helped other parts of the body.
And they were
Amen.
very happy.
Why? Because it like pumped blood down there? Oh,
But it
okay.
can lower your blood pressure, so you have to always ask them before you give them any kind of meds that, and if they're having a high blood pressure.
Almost all infectious viruses come in waves. How many waves of COVID have we had?
Like 3?
We're on the fourth one, right? It spiked and it came down, and we got, okay, it's all good. It got crazy, and then it went down, you know, so we've had, so
All the
we had a lot of
holidays.
that. So that's the next thing I'm worried about.
Thanksgiving.
But I was really worried about ACL,
Yeah.
but there were some cases of COVID, but not near as many as I thought.
They were
Now-
making them get vaccinated. Show that
I
they were
know, so
vaccinated.
that's good, but the holidays are gonna be a whole different ballgame,
Yeah.
right? And so we're gonna see what happens there. So,
No.
when epidemiologists are looking for what the pattern is, they're gonna ask all these real personal questions. And so they're gonna be interested in who are you with, where were you at, how long were you there? And then they're gonna ask just all kinds of other questions, right? And some of these, especially if they're dealing with the sexually transmitted infection, some of these questions can be very personal. But they're not trying to be in your business. What they're trying to figure out is,
Yeah.
you know, what's in common? They want to look at the commonalities, right? And so we can figure that out. Here, yep. What's that?
Your friends.
Okay, fine. So, Cheska's saying I only have 3 minutes. Okay. So, if we think about, this is a chart that I made up. It's not going to be in any book. It's just something that came up. People are happy. They get exposed. From the time they get exposed to the time they show clinical symptoms or symptoms is the incubation period. Preclinical or prodromal, right? You can be infectious at that point. So you might have COVID and not know it, and you might not show any symptoms, but then you're spreading it around. Right? And people are getting really tired of COVID, right? So if they become exposed, they're not following,
They don't care anymore.
that's right, they're not following any kind of, and I get it, right? My young cousin moved to Austin, he met a bunch of people, they went to a party, they all came down with COVID, all of them. And it wasn't bad for them, right?
As long as, like, I mean, as selfish as it sounds, as the way, when I was working at HEB, all of us, like, lived away from our parents. We didn't, like, do anything with older people. And at work, we would wear masks, but, like, how we thought is, as long as we're not around any old people and we're good ourselves, like,
That's a typical young person.
yeah, but, like, I'm talking that's how I thought.
Yeah, but I
So-
I thought I exposed
I
myself.
think that's okay though, because even though I don't agree with it, I got it because I work with the elderly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I think you can think of it as a protection to others, just like the mask.
Yeah.
It protects you from me, you know?
Mhm. So when we start to show symptoms, we get treatment, right? And then there's a whole area of research that's just interested in outcomes. And in outcomes, when we do research in outcomes, you either convalesce, you get better, you die, never good, or you become impaired. So an update on my family member I told you about. Her lungs are so damaged that she's probably gonna need a transplant. She's out of intensive care though. So,
Bittersweet.
How does, it's from COVID, right? How does COVID damage the lung? I mean, I know
it causes blood clots, which causes necrosis of the tissues.
And isn't that like where the scarring in it, once your lungs are scarred, it's harder for them to.
Yeah, they call it glass opacity.
Yeah.
That's what they call it. It's just tissue that's.
The exchange of oxygen.
My, aunt passed from COVID down
I'm really
in
sorry to hear
Houston.
that.
And, hers was from her lungs being scarred from the pneumonia instead of the COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the other thing, you know, people can survive flu or survive COVID and then die from bacterial infection. So, Jessica, what time is it? Jessica says time to go. We will finish epidemiology next time, and then we will start at 5.
When will be our exam? No,
Next Thursday.
Oh,
I thought it was down in December.